in Kobe in Japan 3 years ago, where we discussed our plans to get the next venue to Leipzig. To be true, I harbored serious misgivings and doubts on whether we would ever be able to succeed. We did. Thank you, Sava, and thank you to the present or the former board for this fine decision. A true story of spiritual fascination and academic curiosity, writes Tibetology in Germany. Within the limited time available for me, it would be rather the academic curiosity. Sorry for that. When major cultural traditions meet or reach out to one another, like in the case of the Occident and the Orient, with a distinctly different cultural, historical, and spiritual makeup, it is often accompanied by upheavals and repercussions. Still, the process launched waves of what we can call cross-pollination in many areas. If we take a look at the influence and inspiration generated by the Western's encounter with Asia, and we restrict ourselves, of course, here to the Far East, in particular to India and Tibet, post-colonial studies, and that not only since Edward Said's groundbreaking book, Orientalism, has shown that the dichotomy West versus non-West is too simple. As Deng Xiaoping, our present president of IATS, has suggested, when we talk about Tibet, there is also a case of apparent exceptionalism, which characterized Tibet. And now I quote, Tibet has remained outside the scrutiny of post-colonial discourse. Why in Tibetan studies, and I quote, questions drawn from critical studies on the post-colonial discourse has never been properly raised. This may be as it is, but let's take a look at this purported exceptionalism and look further back what was it generated. As one of the more curious outgrowths, it even led, we all know that, to the exoteric and idiosyncratic Shangri-La hype, which we all meet daily nearly, and legacies that have haunted our perception of Tibet occasionally also in the academia. But when did the Europeans initially receive more concrete information about this part of civilization? Leaving out, due to time constraints, as I said, the esoteric spiritual impetus, we should focus on the academic field. In order to understand how Tibetan studies and later the systematic study of Tibet emerged in Germany, we need to take a small detour into the past. More concretely, the first Western missionaries to arrive in Tibet were from the Society of Jesus. In other words, men of religion. Between 1624 and 40, Portuguese Jesuits set up a mission in Savarang, we all know it's Western Tibet, and in 1661, Albert d'Orville and Johann Gruber traveled through Lhasa on a journey from northwest China to India. Again, Western curiosity. Could anyone imagine a few high lamas from Lhasa turning up in Rome? Probably not. Western curiosity. However, the most brilliant of all the Jesuits in Tibet was the Italian Ippolito Desideri, who set out from Rome in 1712 and having traveled via Goa, Delhi, Kashmir, and Ladakh, reached Lhasa in early 1760. By the time he left Tibet in 1721, after 5 years, Desideri had acquired sufficient linguistic competence to write 5 books. His historical notes on Tibet is all considered a major source of early 18th century Tibetan history. Like his Jesuit predecessors in Japan and China, Desideri well understood the importance of establishing a favorable relationship with local rulers. He gives the most positive account of meeting with the king of the Buddhist kingdom of Ladakh, noting that the Ladakhis use the word Kunchok, the precious one we can translate, for God, the Christian God, of course, and had some conception of the Trinity, Kunchok Sum, which he considered the right word for the Trinity. As he afterwards recognized, this was a misunderstanding, of course. Kunchok Sum refers to Triratna, and he blamed the mistake in part on his interpreter, a Muslim from Kashmir who knew both, apparently, Persian and Tibetan. However, another impetus, and now I turn the tide, we probably know that all, another impetus for the interest in Tibet was the publication of Alphabetum Tibetanum by Giorgio. A massive 840, 20 pages long work written in 1762 in late scholarly Latin. It constitutes the first comprehensive publication of its kind in the Western world. The large-scale encyclopedic attempt to understand Tibetan culture, language, and religion from a Western perspective. Although a major section of the work is based on religious polemics, as we know, it does contain valuable, it does retain some value as a major link to the earliest chain of Tibetan studies in the West. The entire work was a result of the Catholic Capuchin missionary work in Lhasa during the early to the mid-18th century. During this time, when a Chinese military and cultural presence from the Qing court was established in Tibet, the Capuchins had established a mission in Lhasa in 1707 and were studying with the Tibetan Lamas. When the Catholic missionary left Tibet in 1745 after 40 years, that brief window of Western access to Tibet, and indeed to Lhasa itself, closed, and has never really been reopened to the present day on a scale that they enjoyed at that time. Alphabetum Tibetanum was intended to assist, of course, missionaries who would like to go to Tibet. Yet, notable here is also the early interest displayed by not least German philosophers for Tibet, and the question as to the nature and character of what denoted Tibetan religion, and the study of Buddhism, linked in the first place, of course, to Indian Buddhism. Naturally, it was an interest that was aroused throughout Europe, involving French, British, and predominantly German thinkers and philosophers, and added reason for the later text-based orientation of Tibetan studies in Germany, the philological tradition, which has been very strong here in Germany. I will come back to that in a moment. The views expressed by Immanuel Kant, here we have an early selfie of him. That was before Samsung and iPhone was developed, so the quality is not that good, but it looks rather nice. Immanuel Kant, from the 1750s to the turn of the century, reflect a rapidly changing breakdown of the biblical view of history and the philosopher's pronounced interest in the history of the earth and of humanity. He ignored the Bible in viewing the cradle of humanity and the seat of mankind's most ancient culture and religion, and rejected the view commonly held by that Buddhism or the Tibetan religion was a kind of degenerated form of Christianity that was communicated by Andrade, Desideri, and other missionaries. Of course, he studied with interest Alphabetum Tibetanum by Giorgio. Hegel, another prominent philosopher, also adopted an Asian origin of history and a gradual progress or evolution from a primitive state to perfection. Arthur Schopenhauer, he looks a little tired here. He's probably been working all night writing some of his books. Schopenhauer showed a pronounced philosophical interest in Asia too. He is the first European philosopher to be influenced by Asian philosophy and religion at an early stage in his career. He became convinced that the Chanjur was the oldest and most complete repository of Buddhist texts, and admired early translation of some of his texts that had taken place throughout the years before he made that statement, both in French, in English, and in German. In 1850, Schopenhauer became the first Westerner to refer himself as a Buddhist. Already in around 1830, he was of the opinion that Tibet was the land where original Buddhism had survived and was thriving. Schopenhauer, more than anyone else, was to rely on one person in this connection, namely on a Moravian missionary called Isaac Jacob Schmidt. What had happened? Now, there we have Isaac Jacob Schmidt, a nice person, an early selfie again, sorry for the quality. What had happened? At the turn of the 19th century, knowledge of Buddhism and of Tibet slowly matured, and more serious interest can be observed. Much of the foray into foreign territory were made by the Germans, who were employed by the Russian Tsar, and who were writing in German. Well known is the vital interest entertained by the British in Tibet, of course, with their long-term rule in India. We only need to refer to Samuel Turner and his visit to Tibet already in 1788. Now, of particular interest for the topic Tibetology in Germany is the circumstance often ignored by the historians who have studied the Western discovery of Buddhism. It referred to the interest in Tibet that came via access to Mongolia, or the people of Mongolia. The reports on the Kalmucks and the Mongolians left behind by Müller, Pallas, and later Isaac Jacob Smith were decisive for the cause. Smith had lived among the Kalmucks between 1802 and 6, and his History of the East Mongols, Geschichte der Ostmongolen, St. Petersburg and Leipzig, published in 1829. Again, you will hear Leipzig a few times, sorry. Was a translation of an original 17th century Mongolian source, a source that essentially was drawing its information, not least on the Mongol-oriented version of Tibetology or the Tibetan text called Melon, which I have a very personal relationship to. Therefore, it is worth remembering that when we look for the real father or pioneer of Tibetology, as we know it today, we in fact have two candidates. Of course, selfie of the first one, Toma de Kuros, or Sandor Kurösi Toma, also known as the Hungarian Bodhisattva. He was really known as the Hungarian Bodhisattva, who as a philologist and orientalist was the author of the first Tibetan attempt, first Western attempt to write a Tibetan English dictionary and grammar book. Both appropriately considered milestones of Tibetan studies in the West. Eager to see the homeland of the Hungarians. He was actually not Hungarian. I think he was Serb, living in Transylvania and in Romania. But that's another story. Don't tell the Hungarians. He, in fact, should never reach the plateau of Tibet. And when meeting the Tibetans in India, he had lengthy stays in India, in Ladakh, and in Sanskar. He was one of the first Europeans to master the Tibetan language and to read parts of the two canonical collections of Indian Tibetan Buddhist literature, the Kanjur and the commentary in the Tenjur. The other candidate, we return to our friend here, the other candidate, far less known to win the prize of being the pioneer in advancing Tibetan studies in Europe, and in particular in Germany, was Isaac Jacob Smith. He was an Orientalist specializing in Mongolian and Tibetan. Smith was a Moravian missionary to the Kalmucks and devoted much of his labors to biblical translation. He published the first grammar and dictionary of Mongolian, as well as a grammar and dictionary of Tibetan. His works are regarded as groundbreaking for the establishment of Mongolian and Tibetan studies. I know Mr. Kopper will support this assumption. He was born into a pietist family, the Moravian Brotherhood. We shall in a moment return to them. A major work of his is his Tibetan grammar, published in 1839, barely following in the trade of Toma de Kuros' grammar. It was followed closely by Smith's Tibetan-German dictionary in 1841, printed where? In Leipzig. Now we get it. He had about 5,000 more entries than Toma de Kuros' dictionary. When we consider his subsequent publications, such as the German translation of Zanlün, or The Wise and the Fool, I love that this story, his role as a pioneer becomes more evident. He was to be followed in St. Petersburg by Anton Schiefner. Schiefner, was in particular known for a number of translations from the Kanjur, and not least Taranata's History of Buddhism in India. 1868, where was it published? And it's still a highly readable translation, considered as 1868, about 150 years ago. During the same period, also French scholars, of course, and British scholars were very active, but we are now concentrating on Germany. Now back to Germany, and still following the academic trail, largely within Buddhist studies, the 19th century saw a number of scholars with a serious interest in Tibetan studies, and again, since Tibet was still an indispensable tool for Sanskritists, often hand in hand with Indologists. Mention should be made to Heinrich Wenzel, who, like most of his contemporary scholars, studied in a number of Oriental languages. In fact, he was at some point Privatdozent lecturer. He taught Tibetan where? In Leipzig. Finally, in our incomplete prosopography of German scholars who conducted research on Tibet, we must mention the brothers Schlagenbach. There were four of them: Hermann, Adolf, Robert, and Robert, and Emil, mostly known as eminent travelers in Central Asia. Based upon the finding of his brothers, it should be the youngest one, the Schlagenbach, the Emil, who should concentrate on Tibet and Tibetan, and is the first German to write on Tibetan history. foremost, I'm talking about the Könige from Tibet, the kings of Tibet. Actually, the work was based on Lehagera, but of course a later historical source, but it does contain the history of Tibet, all going all the way back to Nyati Temple and to Tibet and all those kings of Tibet. And he also made studies of Tibetan chronology and the life of Guru Rinpoche, a German translation of Pema Katan, what I heard yesterday from Louis, that was actually only one chapter, and not the whole book. But it's the first. Fair enough. Now, we come to a group of people that provide a major impetus to Tibetan studies, and especially one figure who remains one of my genuine cultural heroes. Tibetan studies were actively promoted by a number of missionaries from the Moravian Church in Germany, called it the Herrnhuter Brüdergemeinde. The main seat is in Eastern Saxony, and the archive there is a real treasury for the study of Tibetan translation of biblical text and for Tibetan philology. If you have time, go there. It's 3 hours ride from here, but it's a treasure house of Tibetan text kept in the basement in the archive. You should visit it. They were particularly active in Ladakh, in Lahul, in Khelan. And we come now to the most important missionary whose contribution to classical Tibetan language and dialectic studies cannot be overrated. Heinrich August Jeske, born in Herrnhut, here in the Free State of Saxony, where we currently live. He was a linguistic genius who picked up a number of languages and who spent 12 full years in Khelan, during the time of which he made a number of pioneering works within Tibetology, such as the celebrated Tibetan English Dictionary. As we all know, its wide use of original Tibetan sources has made it one of the best standard dictionaries available. And this up to this very day. For me, at least, he has been an indispensable travel companion throughout my entire life. Among the prominent missionaries who worked there, we find August Wilhelm Heide, but in particular, August Hermann Franke, who should continue Jeske's work, and later make himself a name with his numerous publications and contributions to Ladakhi studies, in particular to Burnpo studies and Western Tibetan version of Gesar Epos. In fact, unknown to most people, he may indeed be regarded as the first professor in Tibetan in Germany when he was appointed extraordinary professor there in Berlin in 1925, also 90 years ago. So, I think, yeah, we have to find one more person who's very important. Now I don't know where this Australia. It is, okay, I speak freely. He is my friend here. It is Bertolt Laufer. Yeah, Bertolt Laufer. Leipzig holds a number of other trophies. It was Leipzig that the first Buddhist mission or association was established in 1903. Tibetan Buddhists, there was a group of Buddhists here in Germany, and they started in Leipzig. But more importantly, for me as a scholar, is a number of excellent scholars that started their career here. And we start with one who went native, we see it here, flamboyant Bertolt Laufer. Possibly one of the most eminent polyglot orientalists we ever met, fluent in a dozen languages like Jeske, but with an unbounded curiosity and linguistic skills, and a pioneer of Asian cultures, ironist, specialist of Mongolian and Tibetan, but also a sinologist. He has written articles more numerous than there are stars in the sky, and there are many. His career started here in Leipzig, where he defended his dissertation in 1897. Here he had studied under Wilhelm Grube, the first scholar to offer courses in Tibetan, in fact as early as the early 1880s, which means roughly 135 years ago. So another highlight for Tibet, for Leipzig. And not only him, but also a number of sinologists with a major interest in Tibet. And Tibetan was Georg von der Gabelens, and later also Professor Hanisch, who made a major contribution to Mongolian studies with the publication and translation of the secret history of the Mongols. So, by the turn of the 20th century, it is not anymore justifiable just to talk about early Tibetan studies. However, you may wonder why so little has been said about the spiritual fascination that was associated with Tibet. Naturally, it's part of the baggage brought along all the time, yet the combination, culmination of the spiritual interest and fascination must, in my opinion, be located to the 20th century. And I'm not talking about the Shangri-La hype or the fascination generated by members of the Theosophic Society with Madame Blavatsky and so on and so forth. But here in Germany, it followed in the trail of the spread and establishment of Buddhist centers all over Germany, as we have it today, as a direct outcome of the diaspora of 1959. Today, Germany can indeed, I would like to say, pride itself of a relative density of chairs dedicated to Tibetology and Buddhist studies. Among the 5 universities in Germany that offer permanent chairs in Tibetology, we count Hamburg, Bonn, Berlin, Leipzig, and we just heard today from Professor Franco that it will continue here, which I'm very, very happy not be the last man to actually turn out. But also Munich and in part Marburg, where probably some of you know Michael Hahn was very active until he fortunately passed away last year. So Saxony, and in particular Leipzig, as the second oldest university in Germany, can find itself of the most interesting and unique tradition. And as we have seen, the University of Leipzig has offered teaching in Asian studies and subsequently Tibetology from the 19th century onwards. Today, the Institute of Central Asian Studies and Indology can look back on more than 50 years of research excellence. Tibetology at Leipzig is highly interdisciplinary. I hope it will continue. Its cooperation with numerous different disciplines has resulted in many research projects, a number of which will be presented at the conference. So, if you intend to continue your studies or even complete your PhD, some of you might consider it. Why not come to Leipzig? This is a special place and you can do it fast. It's a great place to study. And on the planet Leipzig, you can also make your PhD in no time, as we see here. Now, what is left for me to say is that I hope you will have a fruitful seminar with good lectures, a lot of good questions. Should one of you make a mistake, we will tell you when you are wrong. If not, I will be there. What remains for me to say? Think about a lot of success. Samala, Sampi, and then Tame, Shuni, oh, no. Yeah. If you want to study Dhamma, you can do that. And you want to study the extreme richness of Tibet's text, you can do that. You want to go into the field, you can do that. It's fantastic. Thank you.